Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Salud, Prost, Cheers. For those of you guys that are joining us for the very first time, welcome. This is UNLV Hospitality Alumni Association's live stream where you can learn everything there is to know about your favorite beers, spirits, and wine from today's leading industry experts. For those of you guys that have joined us for a past episode, welcome back. We're super thrilled to have you guys here with us again. I'm Andrew. I'm on the executive board for the UNLV Hospitality Alumni Association. And I'm here to welcome you guys to today's episode, The Art of Sake. Very excited about this one. Before we start, just some updates on some upcoming program that we have. Next Friday, June 26th, is our next Cook Like a Rebel episode with our very own Dean Shoemaker, who will be making his favorite dinner party menu alongside executive chef Mark Sandoval in Hospitality Hall. So please be sure to RSVP for that episode. We'd love to have you guys all there again with us. And as always, we love to see you guys engage and post on social media. So when you do, please use the hashtag UNLV Alumni, Hospitality Alumni, and UNLV Hospitality. All right, guys, so let's kick things off. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to today's host, Mark Steele, founder of Restaurant Hospitality Institute.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for the introduction. Salud, Prost, cheers. And for today's class, we're actually gonna add on kampai. Kampai actually is a Japanese equivalent of cheers, and it literally translates to empty your glass. So that's something that we're gonna talk about a little bit today, and hopefully by the end of the session, you will enjoy sake and your glasses will be empty, so kampai. All right, a little bit about myself first. My name is Mark Steele. I've been in Las Vegas for about 45 years. I'm a fourth generation restaurateur. My parents were in the restaurant business. Some of my grandparents were, and actually my great grandfather was a master brewer of Guinness whenever it opened up in the day. I've been working in basically every position up and down the Las Vegas Strip for the past 30 years. Everything from line employee to sommelier to general manager to director of operations. I've opened up restaurants in Bellagio and Mandalay Bay and Encore. So I've been around for a little bit. So I am also a certified sommelier by the Court of Master Sommeliers. We'll talk about my sake education a little bit later, and I'm also studying for my second level Cicerone right now. So here we all are still from the comforts of your own home. And thanks if you joined us a couple weeks ago when we did the Nevada cocktails, and we're back at the Casa de Steel over here, ready to talk about some sake today. I am also the founder of the Restaurant Hospitality Institute. We're actually located just a few blocks east of you on Tropicana. And what we do, and it's a business that my wife and I have had for about 5 years, we're a locally family-owned business, the Restaurant Hospitality Institute. You can see our email address, our website on the back. And we're a state-certified program, state-certified by the Commission on Post-Secondary Education, where we actually train food servers. Very similar to like a dealing school here in Las Vegas, or a culinary school, or a UNLV, it's management school, or also a bartending school. We actually train front of the house aptitude. We train everything under the sun, everything from genuine hospitality, food, liquor, sanitation, which is very, very important nowadays. We teach restaurant etiquette. We teach about service. We teach about upselling and revenue generating, public speaking, physical skills. And of course, we talk a little bit about sake, which is why I'm here today. So, in addition to what we do at RHI with our certified programs, we also do alcohol awareness. So otherwise, if you know of it as a TAM card, if you're serving alcohol in the state of Nevada, you need to have one of these cards. We're actually certified to do that. The program isn't up yet because we got approved during the quarantine, but now that the state regulations are getting back to normal, we should have our program up and going within the next couple weeks. We do international training with cruise ships overseas, and we're also certified by the Department on Training and Rehabilitation, which means that people can actually come to us, to get on training, to get training and rehabilitation for the state of Nevada jobs, and we place them as well. We also have programs for under 21 and for management also. So I encourage you to check out rhinstitute.com and see everything that we do, even though I just explained most of it anyway. So anyway, I'll talk a little bit about my sake experience. So I was like a lot of people, and even though I had studied a lot about spirits and a lot about wine, and I was lucky enough at Bellagio to work with a couple of master sommeliers, that I didn't know anything about sake. And I was working with a company called Pure Management Group here in Las Vegas. And I was slated to be the opening general manager of a restaurant called Social House that some of you might know inside of Treasure Island, but it was a really cool, upbeat Japanese restaurant where everything was served family style. We have a live DJ and celebrities came in all the time, but we had this list of sakes that was about 80 to 100 bottles. So, you know, once we opened up and we got going, I looked at this list and I said, well, how can I train and tell my staff about all this stuff if I don't know anything about it myself? So I took the initiative of, for myself, which I encourage all of you do. You know, you get your education here at UNLV, but life is all about learning other things and taking initiative to do things on your own. And I went out and I attached myself to a couple head honchos of sake around town, and I got myself some books and I started studying. And before you know it, I ended up, you know, studying and learning a lot about it. So much so that I went up to San Francisco for a 3-day trip. And when I was up there, I actually got a certification to be, and I'm sorry, there's some glare back there, of actually being a sake expert by the Sake Education Council. And this was a cool little thing that's hanging in my office, and my name is actually written in Japanese over there, Mark Steele. I can't confirm if it's actually in Japanese, but some people have told me that, and that's how they presented it to me, so I guess I'll just go with it. So also during my time over at Social House, we got often interviewed and we were the hot spot to be. So I did interviews on people.com about sake. I did interviews with the Las Vegas Weekly, Las Vegas Review Journal, and we at the Restaurant Hospitality Institute also do sake personal development, and sake is part of our original hospitality server program. So, and you know, not to mention I've gone to a lot of conventions and met many toji along the way, and toji is, I'm going to start throwing some random terminology at you here. You already learned kampai and toji. Toji is actually the master brew maker or sake maker of every single house over in Japan, and also here in America too. So toji, so I associated with them. I learned as much as I can, and I haven't been over to Japan yet, but it's on the bucket list in some of my worldly travels with my wife, but we'll get over there eventually, and definitely want to learn about it. But I go everywhere, and wherever I get, I definitely want to have some sake, because it's actually one of probably my favorite, if not one of my favorites. So what are we going to talk about today? This is art of sake. We're going to go through a bunch of different kind of categories. You know, the whole intention is not to make anyone a master sake specialist by the end of this half an hour, 45 minutes, but it's give you a general idea about the beverage, because I know a lot of you out there probably just think of it, you know, I only get sake at my local place and it's the stuff that comes out of the box and they cook with, or, you know, we're doing sake bombs and dropping it into beer, or we're drinking hot sake. Well, I'm here to tell you that's not something that the real quality sake that they actually drink out of, or that's the way that they drink it. They might drink some warmer sake in the colder areas of Japan in Hokkaido, which is very, very north, which is close to, you know, Russia and Antarctica. And they might do that after a long day of fishing just to warm them up. But pretty much sake is not it's not something that's really meant to drink warm, but I digress a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about history, some terminology. I'm going to talk about processes too, because sake has a completely different process of any other alcohol that we've learned about previously, or you've taken classes about before. So that's totally different. It's something worth mentioning, and we'll talk about it. Obviously, my specialty is service, so we'll talk about some service. We'll talk about the proper glassware, how to drink it out of. We'll talk about some cultural things, food pairings, obviously, to go along with it. We're obviously going to do some tastings. You know, that's the important thing. And then just in general, some fun facts and some drunk history. So maybe you can win some bar bets with your friends next time you talk about sake, and just basically education. So now you can go somewhere and you can look at a list. You know, I know a restaurant like Lotus of Siam is right down the street from you guys, and they have 80 bottles over there, and you can easily navigate yourself through that and get something that's going to fit your price point and something that's decent. So, all right. But the most important thing, and this is what I spoke of last time, which we shared a lot of stories about, is, you know, hospitality is really, really about telling stories, and it's about engaging with the guest. So, you know, when you're learning this stuff, and these are the things and the terminologies I'm going to tell you, this is not just something you keep for yourself. This is something that you pass along to your guests and people coming into your venues, passing along to your employees, passing along to other people, because the stories ultimately, you know, because people can get the same bottle of sake at 3 or 4 places here in Las Vegas, but what's going to separate yours from what they're getting from the other place? It's the story, and it's the guest interaction, it's the education. So these are things that we're going to talk about, you know, and I encourage you, we're just going to hit the very, very top of the iceberg, but you know, hopefully we'll drink something that you like, and it'll expand you a little bit, and you'll learn about the terminology, and you'll actually go out there and just kind of learn a little bit more yourself. But I encourage you to go into Total Wine or Lee's, and you'll see all all of shelves just filled up with different things. And hopefully by the end of this, you'll be like, oh, now I understand what this is. Now I can get this and see that. So, all right. I know that if you have any questions along the way, obviously I really can't see them, but please feel free to type them into the chat. And then Candace will get them and relay them through Andrew or to us at the end. So, feel free. We encourage a lot of questions as well. So let's move on to, let's start talking about sake. So the first thing that I want to do, because I've already talked for about 5-10 minutes and I'm going to talk a little bit longer too, is let's open up some sake. So if you had some sake with you, if you got any of the 3 bottles, let's go ahead and just open the first one, which is the TOZAI, the living jewel, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, but this is something, at least so while we're talking and while we're just talking about some facts, at least you can actually have something to drink, and whether you like it or you don't like it, at least this is something that maybe can make me a little bit more tolerable while I'm talking, huh? All right, so I'll have some poured for myself and we will say kanpai, enjoy. And we'll just go and smell it and we'll taste it, but we'll talk about it more in a little bit, so. All right, so we'll also say another way of saying kanpai is actually, you can say cheers or congratulations, and it's omedetou, and that's something that you can say in substitute of kanpai, but kanpai just sounds a little bit more cool, and that's what I say whenever I go out, so, but you can say that as well. So, all right, first lesson. First thing, number 1 about sake is the pronunciation of sake. Sake is pronounced sake. It is not pronounced sake. It is pronounced sake. So, that sake actually means something else in Japanese. So sake actually means a generic term for an alcoholic beverage. So if you want to deem yourself a rookie right off the bat, whenever you are going somewhere or ordering or even hanging out with Japanese people, you say sake, you're going to look like you're a professional right off the bat. So we will congratulate Andrew on saying it correctly in his introduction. So good job to Andrew. Well done. So right off the bat, sake. So let's not make that mistake while we're going through or from this point forward. So, all right, let's talk about the sake origins. The origin of sake can be traced back to fermented rice or beverage brought to China by the 3rd century BC. So I'm going to do some dumb math there. 3rd century BC is 2,300 years ago. Since then, it was evolved into a unique, sophisticated alcoholic beverage, which has become culturally significant for those people. Waiting for the next slide. Thank you. Wide variety of flavors. Although sake is brewed only from rice, it offers a whole wide variety of distinct tastes like wine. There are supposedly to be more than 2,700 breweries all over Japan. All the different breweries have different styles of sake with different brewing rice, which we'll talk about later. They have all kinds of different yeast, and they have all kinds of different filtered water, and their own unique brewing styles and brewing culture methods, which they've developed over the past 2,300 years. There are differences distinctive to each sake-making region or prefectures in Japan, adding more complexity to the world of sake. And sake is brewed with intention of consumption within a year of production date. All right, so that's kind of a little bit of a history. So, if you think about all the different water sources that you can get, if you think about all the different rice, and we'll talk about the rice a little bit later, all the different cultural things from the traditions that have been handed down. That's why we have so many different sake. So how are we going to navigate from all that? The process is completely different from any other alcohol as well. So most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the general process of how to make alcohol in general, which you add sugar. You have any general sugar and you put yeast together, you combine the two, and you have different types of sugar, different types of yeast, and it ends up being alcohol with CO2 that comes out. So what makes sake differently than other things is that it goes through 2 chemical processes simultaneously. So this is the fermentation that we were talking to you about. Sugar and yeast equals alcohol and CO2. But if you think about rice, rice is not necessarily very sugary. It doesn't have a lot of sugar. So how are we going to extract the sugar from there? So what they do is they actually take the rice and they put it together and they kind of heat it up. They add some water to where it gets kind of really funky, like sushi rice, and just kind of goes together. And that kind of opens it up a little bit. And that opens up the sugars, the natural sugars that are actually going to come out of there. And then what they do is they add a mold in there, and they put a mold in there called koji. There's different varieties and different brands of koji, and they put koji in there. And that in turn starts the process of making the sugar from the rice. So this is what, as opposed to when we've talked about beer before. I know we talked about bourbon a couple of weeks. In every other alcohol, you have two separate processes where you have the sugar and you've made the sugar either by growing it or however you've done it, and then you take that sugar and then you make the alcohol. So what happens when you talk about sake is actually both of the processes are happening simultaneously. So here you have the starches and kojis are eating the sugar, and the sugars and the yeast are turning it into alcohol. This is all happening simultaneously. It's not two separate processes. So the way that you have to balance these two of how much alcohol you want, how much sugar you want, how much acid you want, how much flavor you want, how much everything else you want is very, very difficult to kind of balance. And this is where all the traditions and all the stuff kind of comes from years and years of experience. They are very, very tight-lipped. Every one of the breweries over there that they are, that they don't really give their house secrets out because it's something that's been passed on for traditions and over the years. So rice comes from different, all up and down from Japan. They're literally used about 80 different types of rice to brew the sake. So all the different rice, they can be long grain ones, they can be very short and stubby, and all of them have certain proteins in there that are different in different interactions to make the sugar, which in turn will make the sake. There's 40 different prefectures or regions that make sake in Japan, and they go all the way from, and that's very identifiable from the water source that's coming through, because if you look at somewhere like Hokkaido, which is the very, very northern region, it's very cold up there. There's a lot of snow. So the water up there is going to be very pure and fresh and clean, thus translating to the sake to be clean and fresh. But once you start getting to more areas that have more industrialization around it, like close to Tokyo, the water is going to be a little bit harder. So that's going to be a little bit more difficult, and it's going to make a little bit more of a robust sake. But then if you go a little bit more farther west, you start getting to the area where there's a lot of underground caves and the waters have a lot of minerals to them. So that in turn, as you guessed it, can create some more sakes that have a lot of minerals to it. So the four major components that we're going to talk about are water, which was what we just said, the yeast, which there's a lot of yeast and that's way too technical for this conversation, and then the different types of rice. The culture and the tradition also have a big portion to do with the sake as well. So, all right, so that's basically the basics of that, the origin, the process of how it's done. So let's talk a little bit about service. All right, service is obviously a big thing for me. So service, and you saw when I just poured myself the glass of Junmai that it is almost in a wine glass. This is actually one of the glasses that we were trying to pour the pecan punch with in our last session, but they actually did come in, and these are perfect for sake. So, I know a lot of you have probably gone out before and you get sake in the small little cups like this. They're ceramic, they're small, they're short, they almost look like a shot glass. This is not something that's really practical for a lot of good quality sake. Is it good for sake bombs and is it good for hot sake? Yes, absolutely. And is it a cultural and traditional thing? Yes, it depends on where you are and different places, but this is not necessarily good for sake, because sake is really something that's really aromatic, and if you pour yourself a little of Junmai, go ahead and smell it. And even though it's brewed like a beer and it has the two processes, you can kind of smell a lot of, it's very clean, it's very structured. It tastes almost like, it smells almost like a white wine while you're smelling some of the flavors. And we'll get to the tasting profile a little bit later, but the whole key is when you go to a restaurant and you order a nice bottle of sake, don't let them bring you over the small ceramic ones. Ask for a wine glass. I don't expect them to have a good glass like this, but something that is, a regular wine glass. This is good because you can swirl it, you can open it up. The aromatics are bigger. And if you're really balling that night, and if you got yourself a really nice bottle of sake, a big wine glass is fine. So don't be afraid to ask for bottles of for wine glasses too while you're going through it. So that's very, very important because you want to be able to enjoy it to its maximum ability. Sake, you want to drink fresh. The intention of when the sake brewing process is is really maybe about 4 or 5 months long, even into 6. But by the time they bottle it up and they send it out, that they are in the intention for you to drink it within 6 months. That's why when you look at a bottle of sake, like all the bottles of sake that we have today, you don't see any vintages on it or any years. And it's because that it's brewed to be drunk fresh and it's brewed to be drunk within a year. There's also some tax reasons behind it also, is that Japan has a different tax structure that we do, that they actually have to pay their taxes on what they make as opposed to what they sell. So this has been the tradition for them to actually make what they sell almost immediately, because they have to pay taxes on it by the end of the year. So make sure you want to drink it fresh. Hot sake, a lot of the stuff that, that again, I've alluded to a couple times already, drinking hot sake, that's the things that is really not the quality sake. That's why we have it, and that's why we drink it hot, is because it kind of masks the flavor. We serve it in small glasses like this, so we can shoot it or put it in our beer, because hot sake is really not something that's really meant to be enjoyed. Of course, if a customer ever wants that, we will do whatever we can to heat it up, but it's a very delicate, very structured drink that changing the temperature is something that can be tough and trying on the sake. So a lot of customs in Japan. A lot of customs are built around sake. They will drink sake traditionally at a wedding. There's 6 big sumo events every single year that happen, and they bury some sake right in the middle of the ring before they do that. So it's a very cultural thing, and it's also something that people like to go out and go drink out after work, and I'm sure that you've maybe seen things, or a lot of people get off of work and they go and they hang out, and there's a cultural thing of drinking sake all night long, and that's a real thing in Japan. And so, the whole society is really built around people drinking sake and the culture. So a couple things also for culturally, if you're going to enjoy some sake with your friends, there's a couple things I want to show you, because you might have some Japanese friends or end up in Japan one time in a business meeting. One thing you never want to do is you don't want to pour your own sake. That's something that it's kind of, when you're in a big group, you always want to make sure that you're pouring someone else's sake and they're pouring yours. It's something that's maybe almost considered insults, that you want to make sure that you're pouring their sake for anyone else. And if you're the one that's being poured, holding the glass with 2 hands, looking people in the eyes, and holding with 1 hand on the bottom, and asking people and this is the way that you're presenting it, and you're acknowledging the way that they're pouring the sake for you. Looking in the eyes is very important when you're giving cheers or receiving some sake. Always when you're making cheers as well. When you're making cheers, a cultural thing is make sure you're giving cheers. The person with the more seniority, or your boss, is always kind of has their glass higher than the other one. So make sure that you're not making the neglect when you're doing that, or the host whenever you're going out to go drink sake with your friends. All right, so there's some cultural things. I know that's a lot of information. Hopefully you're taking notes, or you want to watch this at another time. So let's go ahead and take another smell and sip of this, and then we're going to go into some terminology, okay? So no one ever expects, if you got a bottle of the DASSAI 50, you can look at that and look at the bottle. All it is Japanese writing on there. How the heck are you going to be able to tell anything that's going on? Well, a lot has changed over the course of time, and they've made some English-friendly labels on the back, and this isn't just exclusive for us. They drink some in Europe. They also drink some in South America, but mostly a lot of it is American in the back over here, and the UK also. So how the heck are we going to be able to tell if you go to a list and you see 20 bottles of sake? So we're going to go over some basic terminology right now, and these are all listed on some of the bottles that we are drinking. So, Kara, if we go to the next slide, please. All right, so these are the basics right here. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's go back to me. I'm sorry, I didn't explain one thing. So, my apologies. So a big proponent about how actually sake is made is sake is not always made with the rice by itself, intact, straight from wherever they take it. They actually put it through a process of refinement, okay? And the refinement is actually making it, just making it better, just like anything else. And I always like to use a stone as an example, or a gem, or some piece of jewelry. So if you take it, and here's just a rock right here, but the more you polish it, the shinier it becomes, the better the core becomes, and the better that the inside is. So that's basically in essence what you're doing with a piece of rice. So, you're not just taking the rice and just necessarily brewing it right off the bat. You want to take it, you want to refine it, and you want to make it a little bit better. So obviously, you know, just like a stone, the more you refine it, the more you polish it, the better quality it is, and that's kind of the same way that that sake is identified as well. So, all right, Kara, we can go back to that slide now. Sorry. All right, so these are a lot of the basics right here, and these are some of the things that you're going to see on the logo. I mean, on the label. So you can see on the top, you're going to see a word. You know, look at the second box down, the Daigingo. Okay, Daigingo, and you can see the picture on the very left-hand side. That means 50% of the or less of the rice is actually being polished away. It's normally from 50 to 70% is polished away, so you can imagine it's a pretty time-consuming process, and you can really get a good bulk of the core of the sake whenever you're making it. So the Junmai, the Daigingo is the top level and the top quality, and you know we have one of those that we're going to be drinking momentarily. Then if you look at the next box over, you're going to see the Junmai. So Junmai is a very, very important term, and that's what we're drinking right now, which we'll allude to in a second. But Junmai is a basic terminology that means, that literally translates to pure. So that means that when you see Junmai in there, it's a tradition for some, and it's depending on the sake maker, how they want to do it, they'll actually add some alcohol somewhere along the way, some distilled alcohol. And that does a couple things. It acts as a filler when they don't have enough rice. It also maybe stops some of the chemical processes, and it also adds a little bit more alcohol. There's a lot of things that it does. So when you see Junmai on the bottle of sake, it means that it is pure and no alcohol has been added. So those are two other terms that we want you to understand, and those are going to allow you to read a bottle of sake correctly. Junmai and Daigingo. And by the way, it's pronounced with a hard G, not gin like the alcoholic beverage. It's Daigingo with a G. So that's also a way to sound like you're more educated, even though you might just be learning. The next tier down, which is 40% rice polished, or it was 60% remaining, is Ginjo. Ginjo, so you can read that. We don't have a bottle of that, but that is some of the best valued sake that you're going to find. And that's also with a hard G, Daigingo. And then the one right next to it, you can see that it says Junmai Daigingo, which now that you're all sake experts, you can tell that that means pure, which means no alcohol is added. Then you look at the next tier down, and the next two kind of like loop together, and you have Junmai by itself, which is what we're drinking right now, which means maybe about 30% or less is actually been polished. So it's a process and it's hard to do. So, you know, it's a time-consuming thing. So not all places go through, you know, all the way to Daigingo or Ginjo. So you'll see terms like Honjozo, Junmai, and then the last one, Futsushu, which are all basically the, you know, I don't want to call it the bottom of the sake food chain, but they're definitely not the Junmai, Ginjo, and Daigingo at the top. And, you know, the basic premise is that you've refined the rice a little bit more and you've milled it. And, you know, again, the more you polish it, the more, you know, the better quality of the rice is. And that's the base of what you're doing everything with. All right. So those are the terminologies that we're going to see over the next wine, the next sakes that we're going to drink. So, you know, we're going to give you a quiz later. So let's make sure you're paying attention to that. So the first one we're going to have is the TOZAI, the living jewel. This is just basically a Junmai sake. And Junmai sake means that it is, everyone, it means that it's pure. So that means no alcohol has been added, and it means about 30% of the rice has been polished away, probably less than that. And this comes from an area of Japan called Kyoto, of which we have a map that we're going to show you. And Kyoto is, where do we have it, Kara? You can see that's kind of right in the center there where Kara is putting the circle. Kyoto is known for a lot of underground water sources and lots of minerals, okay? So now if you're just doing some, you know, just some dumb thinking right there, so you already know it's Junmai, which you mean there's no alcohol added. You already know that it's, you also know that since it is a Junmai, that only 30% of the rice has been polished. And now if you know a little bit of that, you can get education off your phone, or basic education would mean that now that you know that the Kyoto comes from a lot of minerals underground with the water source that comes there. So we go ahead and, so now you already know a little bit just by reading the bottle. And if you do have a bottle of it, this one's actually very informative because they must really want to sell it over to us here in America, that it actually gives us the name of the rice. and also the profile of what you should be smelling and tasting. So it says citrus, Asian pear aromas, clean and smooth finish. All right, so we'll go ahead, and those of you who have it, let's go ahead and smell it. And if you have the tasting notes already, yes, we have aromas of white grape, anise, a hint, a little bit of sweet rice. All these things are pretty spot on, and you go ahead and let's go ahead and taste it. Some very white pepper. You can kind of feel your mouth watering in the back a little bit, so you know that there's a good amount of acid in there as well. And then it's got a pretty good finish in there, sitting on the palate. It's sitting, you know, right on there. It's not dissipating really, really quickly. It's something, it's a little bit thicker of a sake because not a lot of it has been milled already. And if you want to talk about food, these are things, so, you know, since you have something that's a little bit of a bigger sake right here, this is something that you have to pair with something that's a little bit bigger, but not as big as a steak, a bigger type of seafood, like let's just call it some baked salmon, some lobster, maybe even some chicken. A homemade chicken soup would go perfect with this, with a lot of herbs and vegetables in there as well. So hopefully you retrieve this from your sake refrigerator or your normal refrigerator, which runs at about 40, 45 degrees, which might be a little bit higher. So, you know, you can normally take these out a little bit before you're about ready to consume them. And they don't even need to be in an ice bucket at your table whenever you're drinking them, there. So I encourage you, if you have this, kampai. All right, and of course, we talked about last time, if you're ever serving a drink to somebody, you want to serve people on the right-hand side because we're prejudiced towards people who are right-handed, and we want to make the best experience for the guests who are taking it with the right hand. So if you are lucky enough to have a second glass, I'd like to kind of compare the two side by side. So I have a second one. So let's talk about the second sake that we have. And this is the one that's gained a lot of popularity over the course of the past 15, 20 years. This was a very small brewery that actually did do some marketing, and they've actually exploded into a big brand, not just here in Japan, but in America as well. So we have the DASSAI 50, which is what I showed you before. The name DASSAI means Otter Festival, and it comes from an area called Yamaguchi, which, let's go back to the map. And you can see it's kind of right on the bottom there in that orange area. And you can see it's completely surrounded by water, so it has plenty of water sources. So plenty of water animals want to be around there. So it literally means Otter Festival because the brewery was just surrounded by otters and, you know, a lot of water, but the water is fresh, it's clean, it's soft. And so therefore, as we kind of discussed about before, we're going to get the same qualities from the sake because the water passes down to that. So the Yamaguchi region is also known for very elegant sakes, but very rustic at the same time because they're kind of home brewed, but the water is very clean and very soft. So we'll go ahead and open this, and we'll pour ourselves a little bit. And I'm pouring for myself, yes. I don't have anyone to do that. My wife is on the computer. So let's go ahead and smell it. And if you smell it, let's go ahead and pick up the first one again and smell that. And you might have enjoyed the first one as an elegant and full-bodied sake, but once you kind of turn it around and you smell the second one, now you can smell the difference between a Junmai, which is 30% polished, to a Junmai Daiginjo, which means that it is 50% or more polished. And actually, that's not just a catchy name because they put DASSAI 50 on there. So that means that this rice happens to be exactly 50% polished before they make the sake out of there. So if you smell this one's going to be very easy drinker. You can smell it's more clean and pure than the first one. You can smell it's lighter bodied. I get a lot of lychee off there. I get a lot of a little bit of citrus in there, and this one is really exuding a lot of floral qualities, which is very, very indigenous and to sakes. There's a lot of floral nuances that you'll smell. So let's go ahead and smell it. Very easy drinking, very pure, light, clean. A lot of the same things that we smelt before, and maybe I'm getting a little bit more of a honeysuckle, a little bit more of a of a lychee fruit coming out on the taste, but this is an excellent sake, and you can tell the difference. And if you want to go back to the other one and taste that, that one tastes a little bit more chalky now, huh? It tastes a little bit more briny, and that's because the rice hasn't been polished as much. But now you can smell this and taste this. Wow, that's very fresh and refreshing on the palate, and light and clean and excellent. So what would you actually pair with this? We talked about, we want to talk about food. So obviously sake is natural pairing with any kind of sashimi or any kind of sushi in general, because the balance, you know, just think about when you have a roll and you have your fresh fish on the inside and it's surrounded by the kind of like the seaweedy around the outside and then the rice around the outside. You want to have this with fresh sashimi, because this is the rice quality that's going to balance it out and put these together. So I'd love to have this with some nice yellowtail right now. A big fresh sashimi platter would be absolutely perfect. So kanpai. Again, we want to serve this at the same temperature as the first one, between 40 and about 45 degrees. All right, let's move on to the next one. And this one is a totally other thing that we haven't talked about, another verbiage, but this is the sacred mist. And in general, most of the sakes actually really have some cool names to it. We've talked about, you know, the Otter Festival. We have the Living Jewel, which was, you know, definitely drinkable. And now we've moved into the sacred mist. There's also some of my favorite sakes that I drink. I like one that comes from northern Japan, from the Kyoto area, that is called Divine Droplets, because they actually don't squeeze it. They actually let the droplets kind of fall out by themselves. So, and then there's also ones that, there's one called Wandering Poets that always has a fascinating story behind it, because they say that somebody who was a poet, he actually grabbed a bottle of sake and he went to the mountains and nobody ever heard from him again. So that was another thing. So we're moving on to the Honjozo Nigori sake, of which we've already talked about the Honjozo, and we know Honjozo means that only 30% of the rice has been polished. And now we can see where the Okayama area is. Or circling right there. You can see it's a little bit more of an industrial area. So therefore the water is a little bit more full-bodied and it's a little bit sweeter. So that's going to work out with the Nigori sake. So let's go ahead, and those of you who have not had Nigori sake before, Nigori is actually literally translates to cloudy or unfiltered. And you can see, if you haven't moved your bottle, that there's actually, that the bottle actually separates, and a lot of the unfiltered stuff, they do actually filter it, but they use a larger mesh where more rice and that creaminess from the rice actually goes through. So you can see that it's actually starting to separate just a little bit ourselves here. So when you have a Nigori, I'm sorry, you want to take it and you kind of want to shake it first. So you're going to shake it back and forth. So that way the entire bottle is cloudy all the way through. Len, let's go ahead and open this. And we save this for last, because even though this is not necessarily the highest quality, because it is only 30% polished as opposed to the other ones, that this is actually, it's a little bit thicker on the palate. It's a little bit sweeter. And this is something that a lot of, you know, this is like an entry-level sake. And this is also something that you want to have towards the end of dinner. You know, you can have this with desserts, but we'll go ahead and try that out and taste it for ourselves. So we have our glass here, and we can pour it out, and you can see it's completely different than all the rest of them. Very milky, very creamy, and all that we discussed about earlier. And even if you look at the legs of it, it's sticking to the side, which means it's higher in alcohol and it's a little bit thicker. So let's go ahead and smell it. And when you smell it, you can smell smells like rice, right? And it smells very creamy, and it smells just kind of looks like it is. It's very milky as well. But it will be high in acidity, which makes it very, very good with food. This is not something that you necessarily talk about all the time, or would even feel like this is high in acidity, but also milk is very high in acidity. So this is something that kind of goes along with it. So let's go ahead and taste this. Sits on the palate a lot more. It's very chalky, very milky, very creamy, and you can see how this might go well with some dessert, right? First, perfect complement to some fruits, some desserts, some mochi, or also something that I used to pair it with when I worked at my Japanese restaurant, and I actually paired this with a Kobe carpaccio that was sliced very thinly, but we put a wasabi cream right over top of it. And this was something that paired very, very well with it. But as you can see, it's very milky, it's very creamy. This is something more that's not as floral as all the rest of them, but this is something that's totally different, but it's still sake. So we want to serve this a little bit more at room temperature. You can take it out of the fridge, but it needs to be something that needs to open up a little bit more. So those are our sakes that we've tasted. We learned quite a few different terminologies. I think we have a few more terms that we can put up. So we talked about Nigori. A term that you also need to know that you'll see quite often on a bottle is nama, because one thing that we didn't talk about during the process is actually sakes will actually pasteurize and heat up their sake, so they stop all the funky process that's going on. Once they heat it up, they kind of lock everything in time, and it makes it easier for transport. But if you have a nama sake, it means that it's been unpasteurized. This is something that's going to be more common that you're in Japan. If you can find something here in America, I suggest to get it, especially because it's it's still evolving. You will open up 2 bottles of nama right next to each other, and they will be completely different from each other because they're still both kind of evolving in the bottle itself. And then we have the umashu, and the reason why we're even just kind of touching on that is the umashu, a lot of the times they don't know where to put on a bottle. They don't know where to put it on the wine list, and it's actually a plum wine. So you might see that as a lower cost item. You might see it on a sake list somewhere, but if you see the umashu somewhere, that's something that you definitely don't want to, unless you want plum wine, but that's something that they kind of put in there and they'll throw it in the sake list, but you gotta be aware of that because you don't want to order that if you're looking for sake. So, all right, so that's kind of all the information that I have. I could probably talk a little bit more, but do we have any questions? Is there anything that needs to be addressed afterwards?
Yes, actually, Mark, I do have a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
So Allison said that she saw some sake from California and Oregon, and
Sure.
She wanted to know your thoughts on domestic sake.
Okay, that's a great question, Allison. Great, thanks for asking. So there are actually 6 actual real breweries that are on the West Coast. In Oregon, I've had some great sake from Oregon before. I've had some great sake from California. They have actually taken indigenous products here, but they've taken the traditional brew making methods and they've hired toji from Japan and brought them over here. So even though that it's indigenous product, they're using technology a little bit more so than they are in a lot of the breweries over in Japan, that, it's still the same stuff. It's something you're going to get that's going to be a little bit more crisp and clean and maybe a little bit more fruit forward, because let's just compare something like wine. Okay. So you look at Old World wine and you look at New World wine. Old World wine would be all the breweries in Japan. New World wine would be American wines and the breweries and the sake places here in America. So when you compare the two in winemaking world, your New World wines normally have a lot more fruit. They're a little bit more aggressive, and that's the same thing that translates to sake using the indigenous product, but they actually use the traditional making of it from the toji that's coming over from Japan.
Great. And then I would also like to know, how long can these keep in the fridge?
Excellent question. So, I mean, does that mean you've opened it already and then you're putting it back in the fridge? If you can make it last that long, that's great. But if you can open it up, oxidation is never a good thing for anything that's still kind of evolving. And sake is always, even though they pasteurize it, it's still kind of evolving a little bit. So any kind of oxidation, just like wine, is not good for sake either. So once you open it, and any of the sakes that you opened it up and you put in your fridge right now, they're really only, we'll call it at its peak performance for about another 2 or 3 days. So they will last and you can drink them and they're not going to go bad and they're not going to go sour like a lot of wine does, but they really only last to that full potential for about another 2 or 3 days. And let's also go back to the point that I was making, that all sake really is intended to be drunk within 6 months of it coming out of the brewery. So, there's not a lot of, that's the sad thing about a lot of these bottles, is some of them have born on dates on there. So this says 8/19. which is not a year old yet. So this is fine and ready to go. But you want to drink sake fresh, and if you open it up, don't leave it in your fridge for more than 2 or 3 days.
Great. And then Wanda would like to know, is there a sweet sake that's like dessert wine?
Yes. Well, I mean, the first thing I would kind of, and that's a good question. And it's very, very popular actually over in Japan nowadays. And that's actually one of the things that saved the sake business to a little bit, because it was getting to be a very old traditional thing that a lot of the new generation of people and kids were not drinking sake. And plus there was so much wine coming over now, so much Japanese whiskey. So the sake, Toji, and a lot of the makers had to change their ways of thinking. So yes, the Nigori has always been around, and that is sweet. And if you haven't tasted it already, that's something that might be up your alley. But if you're looking for something a little bit more flavored, there are definitely brands out there that make sparkling sake with different type of flavors to them. I hate to make it compared so trivial to a White Claw or something like that, but it's kind of got the same essence to it, where it's got the sparkling, it's got the same essence, and it's got the sweetness to it. But first I would try a Nigori before I went down that road. But there's some very serious sake, and some of the sake makers are actually making stuff that's sparkling and sweet and is flavored as well. So
Jen would like to know, what are your recommendations for best places in Vegas to purchase sake for your home?
For your home?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for your home is a good question. For restaurants are a little bit tough right now, and I'll go on a little bit of tangent because of the knowledge that I have, and I'm able to navigate a list that, there's not a lot of places in town, sadly. There's some places with some big lists, and I mentioned Lotus of Siam before, but the value doesn't really, doesn't correlate sometimes, but I definitely like to go there and have a nice bottle of sake with my wife. If you want to get a nice bottle of sake for your home, I would definitely for sure go to the Total Wine in town, go to any Lee's. And Lee's is really sporadic. I don't know if they have a website that kind of tells what different ones have different ones, but I've been to some big Lee's, Discount Liquor, and they have just one small area of shelves, but the one right down the street from my house actually has almost 3 full shelves side by side. But find one that you like, and I suggest and I highly recommend to go out and go buy some, go to Total Wine, go to Lee's, buy the stuff that you like. It's all about taste in the end. My taste is different than everyone of whoever's watching right now. So find something that you like, and then that evolves from there. So I would suggest definitely, if you're going to take it from home, Total Wine and Lee's.
And Gail would like to know, what about cooking with sake?
Well, it's number one, you don't want to use any quality, just like you don't use quality wine whenever you're cooking. You want to use something, because the whole idea about cooking with wine and cooking with alcohol is you're kind of cooking off the alcohol, and you're leaving the base and the effervescence of what you have remaining. Okay, so if you're cooking with sake, it's definitely recommended. Most of the Asian restaurants that I worked at and I've been to before, they definitely use sake in a lot of their cooking. But keep in mind, if you're ever going to do it at home, that I would taste the product first and imagine it without the, look up tasting notes online, imagine it without the alcohol, and will that be a clever component to go along with the food that you're actually cooking? Obviously it's made 100% from rice, minus the non-Junmai that has alcohol in there as well. So, once that cooks off, it's what's the essence. So you're getting a lot of starch, you're getting a lot of rice. So anything that you're ever going to cook it with, does what you're cooking with need to have some more of those qualities to it?
Great, thank you, Mark. Are there any other questions? Nope, I haven't seen anything come in.
All right, well, those were all good questions. Thank you very much. I encourage you guys to check out our website. You can also follow us on Facebook. And
I actually do have one more question, Mark. I'm sorry to
interrupt. No problem. Bring them on.
Cocktail ideas with sake.
Oh, cocktail. Oh, that's a good question. That's a tough one. I'm not really a cocktail expert, but I will tell you what a lot of places are doing in town. A lot of places that don't have, let's call it, they don't have a full liquor license. So a lot of places are actually taking, because the sake actually does fall into a beer and wine license here in the state of Nevada because the alcohol is right there and all that. So what you can actually do is a lot of places are actually taking a very neutral Junmai and infusing it with maybe some juniper to make it more like a gin, or maybe a little bit more of a put some sugar in it to make it more like a rum. And they're making it very much like a spirit. But if they want to just use sake by itself, it's very, very, just very neutral. It's very similar to maybe something like and again, I would not suggest it with a Junmai Daiginjo for sure. That's something you want to drink by itself. But a Junmai would almost be something that you would add it normally, just like you would a neutral spirit, like a vodka. And that would be, I don't have any cocktail recipes. I didn't come prepared for that. I'm sorry. But, if you took this Nigori and you added it to something a little bit sweet, that would go well also. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. I don't see any other questions just yet, but if I get anything after the class, I will definitely send those to you to answer for sure. But thank you again. Thank you for spending your Saturday evening with us. This was so informative. All the comments I'm seeing is everyone seemed to enjoy it, and they're thanking you for all of your knowledge and all of the information that you shared.
Thanks for everyone for being here. And again, we're right down the road, and we'd love to, if you want to expand any other knowledge, we do beer classes, wine classes. We'd love to have you come and see what we do.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. And thank you everyone again for being with us today. Just to let you know, we have a couple more upcoming events. On June 26th, we have another Cook Like a Rebel, and it's actually our very special Cook Like a Rebel. Dean Stowe Shoemaker will be in the kitchen that evening, and he will be making his specialty French onion soup with Cornish game hen stuffed with wild rice and green beans. So you definitely don't want to miss this. It's the Dean's dinner party, and we would love for you all to join on that day. We also, which is not up on this list, but on July 18th, we have another Salud Prost Chairs with Dr. Murray McKenzie, and he will be talking about whiskey and scotch and going a little bit more into how it's made and the tastings and making a couple cocktails. So please also look out for that one. You can register for all of our events on our hospitality event page. It's www.unlv.edu/hospitality/events. And as always, please tag us in any of your tasting or anything that you've been doing for these events. You can follow us at UNLV Hospitality and at UNLV Hospitality Alumni. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So once again, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We love having you, and we look forward to seeing you for our upcoming events in June and July. Have a great rest of your Saturday.